Here's another quote. Here's a typical sign from a museum which depicts the age of the reptiles from the Natural History Museum. And here's another paleontologist making a quote about mammals. In a sense, the age of the dinosaur is a misnomer. Mammals are just one important group that lived with the dinosaurs, coexisted with the dinosaurs, and survived the dinosaurs. I have no problem whatsoever looking at the Word of God, Genesis, in that creation week, and looking at the evidence and marrying the two together. I do have a bigger problem with looking at the evolutionary theories and trying to marry all that together. It doesn't add up, does it really? Which one makes the most sense? I'm going to go for the biblical side. Not just the animals, but also the plants. Here's Dr. Peter Crane from the Royal Botanical Gardens in London. I always think about the late Cretaceous period, the dinosaur era. If we're there and able to wander around in these forests, the vegetation will look very much like today. Dogwoods, tulip trees, magnolias and so on, walnuts, oak relatives, chestnut relatives and so on. All of these groups that we consider as being fairly modern groups of plants also been around quite a long time ago. So now we've got the plants and the animals all at the same time. It's made modern day plants, modern day animals stretching back according to the evolutionary paradigm an awful long way. And there's some kind of typical fossils and so forth that are found. So, okay, if all that is true, creation week and so forth, wouldn't that mean that dinosaurs, did they go on the ark? And come on, how could you get two 30-odd ton sauropods onto an ark? Well, good question. Let's have a look at that. How big was the ark, first of all? Now, the problems we tend to have in our imagination regarding Noah's ark is that we're often used to seeing it depicted in children's storybooks, which often depicts a picture something like that. It's always quite tiny, there's always giraffe necks sticking out the top, and it looks really flimsy. You're not going to get dinosaurs and stuff those in there. It's not going to survive a strong breeze, let alone a catastrophic flood. Now, we know the ark didn't look like that. We don't know exactly what it looked like, but we do know its dimensions. 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high. That is big. Now, a set of Christian businessmen in Hong Kong have actually built a theme park to those specifications. Right next to the motorway, going to the airport. So that's fantastic. To really kind of change that perception of what people's views are regarding Noah's Ark. It's big. That's a big ship. Now, a lot of people criticise that. Yeah, but there's no way you could get a ship that size made out of wood. It wouldn't survive the stresses of the oceans and so forth. Well, we do know that you can get ships of that size in wood, because a Chinese emperor, an admiral called Zheng He, did exactly that. He built a flagship of that kind of size, 450 feet long, and that's in recorded history. So we know that is that's absolutely historical fact. So you can get ships that size. And there's a typical size ship alongside it to put it into scale. It was big. So what kind of a storage capacity are we talking about on Noah's Ark? Well, next time you get stuck at a level crossing and a freight train goes past, try counting the freight cars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When you get to 520, that's how many freight cars you could fit onto Noah's Ark. That's an awful lot of space. Now, when you're taking dinosaurs onto Noah's Ark, you're not going to take Grandma and Grandad, Brachiosaur or a Apatosaurus, the full-size things. There's no need to. You could take a 4-year-old, a juvenile, which is about the size of a sheep, and put that on Noah's Ark. You don't need the full-size animal. Especially as well because God says when they got off the ark to be fruitful and multiply, so you might want the younger animals rather than the older ones. And because of that natural selection process that I mentioned earlier, there were lots of creationist models for working out how dinosaurs could have feasibly fit on the ark. There's a chap called Jonathan Mudmarapp who's actually put a study together. He's taken all the evolutionary critics, he's taken all their comments one by one, knocked them back, give them all the benefit of the doubt, and has addressed every single one of the issues. How would you store them? How would you feed them? How would you take care of the mess and so forth? Dinosaur plop and all that kind of thing. It's all sorted out in his article. But according to that, you'd actually only need 55 dinosaur species, dinosaur kinds on the ark. Because with natural selection, you can breed out more. So, interesting. And there's feasibility studies on there, which I'll give you the sources to later on. So the ark was a huge thing. Also, this is interesting as well, dinosaurs may have been an awful lot smaller in terms of their weight size, their mass. What scientists have recently realised, this 2009, that their calculations for calculating dinosaur mass may be totally out by a factor of 2, which is amazing really, because what they did, they applied the mathematical model of calculating dinosaur mass and applied it onto modern day animals like elephants, and the elephants came out of weighing twice as much as what they should do. We think, well, why didn't they simply take the model of calculating a modern day animal and extrapolate that back to a dinosaur? What do I know? So actually dinosaurs, rather than 38 tonnes, could be more closer to 20 tonnes, 18 tonnes. So an awful lot smaller than what we actually think. Okay, where are we up to? Let's pull together what we've got so far. So God creates. On day 6, he creates the land animals and dinosaurs. Genesis tells us all about that. We have the global flood. He tells the animals, he commands them to go onto the ark, he commands them off the ark, including dinosaurs. And if that's true, should we find evidence for that in the Bible and in our modern day surroundings, if all that's true? So first of all, does the Bible record dinosaurs? And this is a question that young lady was asking on that session 2 weeks ago. We can't tell you where dinosaurs are in the Bible. Well, you're not going to find the word dinosaur in the Bible, because the word dinosaur is a relatively modern word. It was only coined for the first time in 1841 by Sir Richard Owen. Sir Richard Owen, incidentally, designed the Natural History Museum. He was a Christian creationist. If you look at the Natural History Museum, it's constructed like a cathedral. It was his way of actually glorifying God. Of course, that's been dispelled afterwards, but that was Sir Richard Owen. But the first impression of dinosaurs was something like that. They're quite well off the beam in terms of what dinosaurs look like. But the word dinosaur was coined in 1841. So you're not going to find the word dinosaur in the Bible or any other modern words like Tyrannosaurus Rex, Stegosaur, Brachiosaur. All of those are modern words. You will not find them in the dinosaur, in the Bible even. What you will find that describes a large reptilian beast, there's another word that describes that, which is in the Bible quite a lot. Sorry, Leviathan, Behemoth, dragons more commonly. Dragon is the most common. If you go to the King James Version of the Bible, which was published 230 years before the word dinosaur was actually invented, and you do a word search, if you've got an electronic Bible, if you haven't, you can go onto the internet, go to BibleGateway.com, select King James Version, and search on the word dragon. It comes up well over 30 times in the King James Version. And only on a small number of occasions does it allude to Satan as being a dragon. The majority of references regard to wild animals out in the wilderness as dragons, quite interestingly. And there's lots of stories about dragons out there being slayed by man, isn't there? Those kind of legends exist all the way across the world. The World Book Encyclopedia says this: the dragons of legend are strangely like actual creatures that have lived in the past. They are much like the great reptiles, dinosaurs, which inhabited the earth long before man is supposed to have appeared on earth. But if that's true, if dragons are dinosaurs and they live together with man, there's a real problem for the evolutionists, because what would that do to the evolutionary theory? The only theory that takes God out of the equation. Well, it would destroy it, wouldn't it? It would blow it out of the water. Therefore, there's not of effort put in trying to minimise the impact of that and say, no, dinosaurs are a myth and so forth. Here's an interesting quote. Lewis Jacobs: co-occurrence of men and dinosaurs, such an association would dispel an earth of vast antiquity. The entire history of creation, including the day of rest, could be accommodated in the 7 biblical days of the Genesis myth. Evolution would be vanquished. That's quite a revelation, isn't it, from an evolutionist point of view? He wasn't a believer, but he knew the biblical account of creation week and the 7 creation days. And he knew an association with mankind and dinosaurs at the same time would destroy the theory of evolution. So there's been an awful lot of work put into trying to disprove that association. So there are St. George and the dragon, There's the dragon on the Welsh flag, but it's all myth and kind of downplay it. Everybody heard of Carl Sagan? He was regarded as America's smartest man in the kind of 70s, 80s, and he died in the mid-1990s, I think. He knew that that kind of association between dinosaurs and man, dragons and man, would cause problems for the evolutionists, and he was an atheist. So he actually wrote a book to try and explain why there were so many people around the world that have dinosaur legends in their culture, because he knew that was a threat to the evolutionary theories. Again, I'm racing ahead of myself. I'll come to that one in a second. Here's a quote from a biblical commentary from 1809, referring to a dragon, then I'll come to Carl Sagan. Alienus speaks of a dragon in India, which when it perceived Alexander's army near at hand, gave such a prodigious hiss and blast that it greatly frightened and disturbed the whole army. And he relates of another that was in a valley near Mount Pelianeus in the Isle of Chios, whose hissing was very terrible. That's a biblical commentary from 1809. And yes, there's a Chinese zodiac. There's 11 actual creatures on the Chinese zodiac, and hang on a minute, one mythological one. That kind of really doesn't make sense. Perhaps that mythological one wasn't a mythological one, perhaps it's actually a real creature. Perhaps that's why it's on the Chinese zodiac. So, Marco Polo, on his travels, also described dragons and dinosaurs. In this province, there's such huge snakes and serpents of such a size that no one could help being amazed even to hear of them. They are loathsome creatures to behold. They have enormous heads and eyes so bulging that they are bigger than loaves. Their mouth is big enough to swallow a man at one gulp. He goes on to say, their teeth are huge. All in all, the monster of such inordinate bulk and ferocity that there is neither man nor beast but goes in fear of them. They go to the dens where the lions and the bears and other beasts of prey have their cubs and gobble them up whole, parents as well as young. Marco Polo describing dinosaurs or dragons. Do you know they actually found this in 2003? An actual fossilised skull. Somebody seen that before? What does that look like to you? Any thoughts? It looks very much like a dragon, that, doesn't it? I would certainly concur with that. Here's what one academic said. There is on National Geographic on the picture when it was discovered. Interesting, look what they've done to the mouth parts there. They've fleshed over the mouth and turned it into a kind of herbivore type creature to make it look less like a dragon. But here's a Harvard fossil historian. The shape of the dinosaur's skull, with its long muzzle, bizarre knobs and horns, surprised the scientists. But the skull looks strangely familiar to anyone who has studied dragons. They've called it Dracorex, that's the official scientific name. Dracorex Hogsworthia, by the guys who found it, because of the resemblance to the dragons in Harry Potter. Dracorex has a remarkable resemblance to the dragons of ancient China and medieval Europe. It was found in America, by the way, that particular skull. So, we can't have that as being a dragon, because dragons would represent a threat to the evolutionary theory. So what they've done is quite interesting. What they've said is Dracorex, in that black and white picture on the bottom right, Dracorex is the one on the left. They've said that's a juvenile Pachycephalosaurus. The middle one is its teenage years, its bones, they say, reabsorb into its skull. I kid you not, this is the theory. And the horns disappear completely. When it becomes an adult, it becomes a Pachycephalosaurus, an innocent herbivore, plant-eating dinosaur. Remember those three skulls I showed you earlier regarding the dogs, and there's different ways of looking at it? I mean, to me, that just sounds a bit ridiculous, really, but that's what scientists say, because they don't want it to be a dragon. They can't have it as being a dragon, a Dracorex, a real-life fossil.